Today is Tuesday, July 23rd, 2015, and my name is P.L. Malcolm, and I'm here with legendary band director Andre Arrouet, and we're going to conduct an FBA legacy interview. So Andre, welcome. The first thing I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about your choice of getting into music and being a band director. What were maybe some of your circumstances or the beginning of your band journey?
Well, thank you, PL, and I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. Actually, it happened, I think, when I was 5 years old, but it was only in my subconscious. And the reason I say that is my folks were always into music. They weren't musicians, but they loved good music. And it goes back to the 30s with the big bands. My mother played piano, and she loved classical music and so forth. And so I was exposed to that even while I was in the womb, I believe. And so I evidently had this innate love for music. And one of the first things they did that I can recall is when I was 5, they took me to see the Mario Lanza story, the great Caruso story, starring Mario Lanza in his place. And I was 5 years old, and I was so taken by that, enthralled by that, by the singing, that we walked out of the movie theater and I said, "Mommy and Daddy, I want to be an opera singer." And so they marched me right down to the church a few days later, and they had started, it was an Episcopal church, and they had started a children's choir. And so at age 5 or 6, I think it was probably 6, I joined this children's choir and sang in that all the way through junior high school. And then there was another milestone along the way. They loved to dance, they loved big band music. And this has a lot to do with movies, but nonetheless, they took me to the Glenn Miller story in like 1953. And I discovered what jazz was and what big bands were, and I was just totally enthralled and couldn't wait to hear them on the radio and that sort of thing. And in fact, when I was, I guess, about 12, they gave me my first record player and threw me a birthday party, and they asked the kids if they wanted to bring gifts, and they said sure. And so all the kids would ask me, "What do you want?" And I said, "I want Glenn Miller records." Well, this was at the time of Bill Haley and the Comets, Elvis Presley beginning to make some noise and so forth. And they looked at me like, "Ooh, why do you want to do that?" And I said, "Because it's great music, it's jazz," and so forth. And so I did that. And of course, they also had taken me to lots of concerts and over the years, and I just was always intent on it. And one of the milestones was that when I had turned, I think it was in the 3rd or 4th grade, I think it was, our town in Long Island, I was originally from Babylon, Long Island, had an American Legion post, and they decided to start a drum and bugle corps under their sponsorship. And to kick it off, they sponsored an exhibition given by all of the really fine New Jersey corps, junior and senior, to come over, and actually I was probably a competition, but my folks took me to that, and I just was fascinated, mesmerized by what they were doing in their marching and their playing and their music, and I just had to be a part of that. And so I think, and of course this new young corps was recruiting, but their age limit was 12 to 21. And so my folks took me down to the Legion Hall, and I think, like I said, I was about in the 4th grade. And they said, "Looks a little young, a little small for this," but they said, "If he's really interested, bring him down. We rehearse twice a week. Why don't you bring him down once a week, and we'll take one of our folks and show him some of the principles of blowing a bugle." And of course I did that. And of course I think they probably did that to kind of dissuade me, and thinking that I would probably lose interest after a month or two. Well, I didn't. And I kept going back, and they finally gave me a mouthpiece, and I would take that home and work on the mouthpiece. And then they finally gave me just a plain old little Boy Scout bugle, and I would march up and down the street blowing on that thing. And I made my debut at a Methodist church talent show playing taps on this Boy Scout bugle. Well, fast forward, I got to be about 10, and the Corps had grown and even got uniforms. They were using T-shirts and dungarees at the time, but they got their own, they got new equipment and or uniforms. The manager of the Corps was a former Marine DI, and he meant business. He trained us as though we were recruits at boot camp in Parris Island. If you were marching in a company front and you're out of line, he'd come up behind you and give you a boot right in the rear end. And of course, here I am at this time still marching with kids who are mostly in junior and senior high school. And I'm maybe 5'1" or 2", with short arms and short legs, trying to keep up with these guys on 5-mile parades and all that sort of thing. But I loved it. It was just great fun. And by the time I moved south, I had become a fanatic, and we'd gone to competitions and all of that. And I just thought it was the greatest thing ever. And meanwhile, of course, I was recruited for the junior high, elementary and junior high bands, and it was okay, but it wasn't near as much fun as the Corps. And my dad had gotten polio about 1954, and about the time we were ready to start a band instrument in elementary school, and so my folks decided that it would be best if I played a school instrument, and so they gave me a mellophone to play. And then eventually in junior high school, they gave me a French horn. And so that's how I got started on horn. So those were my early influences. And by the way, at the time, I didn't think a whole lot, nor did anybody in the Corps think much of high school bands, because up there in New York, they didn't march. They just played, and they only met twice a week during school and so forth. And so it didn't look like it was really serious. So that was my subconscious that led me to it. Deciding to become a band director was a very difficult decision, because my dad had really got me interested in flying and anything to do with airplanes. And I had a god brother who was a Navy pilot, and it was a kind of a hero of mine and so forth. And so I decided when I started high school, or actually in junior high school, that I wanted to be a Navy pilot and so forth. And so my dad subscribed to the Naval Institute proceedings, which I started reading in junior high school, and Aviation Week, and I followed that all the way through. And about the fall of my senior year, I was still expecting to do all that. And I had made all-state band, and I had eventually, I need to back up just a moment. We moved south when I started high school, and I had moved to Columbus, Georgia, and that was the home of the Jordan High School Band and the Columbus High School Band. And the Jordan High School Band that summer had gone to Texas and won the National Concert Band Competition under the direction of Bob Barr. And so I hadn't joined band. I missed band camp, and so I didn't sign up for band. And I was staying after school one day, and I heard this really interesting sound coming from down below the school. It was kind of like the Leon High School setup, where they had an athletic field down below. And so I kind of made my way around there, and as I got down to the track area, they were having a citywide track meet, and these were the opening ceremonies, and the Jordan High School Band was standing there, in perfect block formation with 8 recording tubas in the back, not sousaphones, and this gorgeous sound coming out of these instruments. They were playing the Colonel Bogey March, and I was just thunderstruck. And I got home and I said, Mom, you got to do something about getting me in the Columbus High School Band, because if that's what all the bands sound like down here, I want in on that. And so I joined the Columbus High School Band, and it was they couldn't change my schedule the first semester, but they had for the band itself, and they had maybe 115-piece concert band. So they put me in John Corradino's, what Jack Kruger would refer to as his little beefaroni class. Just a collection of ragtags who had come in, and he got us to play some solos and so forth, and he decided I needed to be in his top band. And so he asked me, he said, I can't put you in, but I can put you, if you'll come in at 7 o'clock every morning when we have marching band practice, I'll put a space in there, and I know that you can march and so forth. And so that's the way I did it. And of course, that Christmas vacation, he took us down to Miami for the Orange Bowl. We did a concert. We did a performance on the Friday night fireworks pageant, and I just completely fell in love with this concept of band, because I was hearing all these great bands, and they were far better than the drum and bugle corps that I was hearing. So my senior year, I just got an epiphany, and And I believe the Lord told me, Andre, you need to major in music. You need to become a band director. And that was reinforced by one of those tests that they give you in terms of what your talents are and what your future occupation might be. And the two things that I scored off the charts on were leadership and music. So that's when I decided to go ahead and major in music.
Well, Andre, I love hearing how your parents were such a major influence for you.
Yeah.
And it also sounds like another major inspiration is just your sheer passion and your desire, and how you just kept hearing all these groups and wanting to be a part of that.
That's right. And, and it's interesting because I quit band 2 or 3 times in my life. Once was when we moved from Long Island to Georgia, and then when my dad took a job in Western North Carolina, it was a real small country school, and they had a band of 40 or 50, but it wasn't a really sophisticated group like the one in Georgia. And I decided, well, I really want to do that. And so I was sitting in class one day, and during the band period, the band director was getting ready for a parade, so he was marching them around the bus loop around the school. And I was kind of looking out the window and saw that and saw how much fun they were having, and I thought, I really miss it. So I got back in the band again.
Well, let me move you a little bit
to
your teaching career.
Yeah.
What were some of the places that you taught at, and some of the things you, besides just teaching, what else did you get involved in?
Yeah. Well, I went to Appalachian State University. Actually, it was Appalachian State Teachers College, ASTC. We had a small music department of about 75 or 80 music majors. And we had all of the professors had been public school practitioners, had great experiences in groups, whether they were elementary or choral or band. And so I had that benefit of small group instruction. And in fact, we had a concert band and a wind ensemble, and I was one of 5 horn players. And so that's where the rubber met the road. And one of the weaknesses that I had never conquered, even though I made the all-state band in high school, was I was a terrible sight reader, because the corps taught you how to play by rote. Had a little X over the notes, you pressed in the valve when you had to do that, and so forth. And I had a really good ear. God gave me a good ear, and I could learn a tune very, very quickly. And so I would just sort of fake my way through it until I learned the music. And when I got to college, my applied teacher sat me down. He was also the band director and a trombone player. Said, Arrouet, we're not going any further until you learn how to read. And I said, well, thank you, Jesus. And so we worked on reading skills for that whole first year. And that really brought me around to where I developed a degree of confidence. And I transferred that to my teaching. Once I started teaching, I wanted to make that a major aspect of my teaching, because up to that point, I was able to get away without being a reader.
All right.
And so my rule with my beginning band kids and all of my other band students was that if you can't write it, say it, sing it, and play it, you don't know how to read. And I made them subdivide on the blackboard, and I made them sing it, and the whole business. And one way or another, I didn't realize it at the time, but I didn't understand about people have different learning styles, and so you do the kinesthetic and the visual and the auditory and so forth, and that really helped those kids in one way or the other. And that was always a big hallmark, and particularly when we went to sight reading in both the junior high and the high school, because I failed in sight reading my first year at Southwest Junior High School. We made it 2, and which was pretty, I guess if I found out later, which was pretty ordinary for a first year teacher, but I began to take it really seriously. And so, and I had chosen a junior high school to start my teaching in because you could teach in a junior high school. And I knew that high school band directors had big programs, didn't get to do a whole lot of teaching except what was on the page starting from the upper left-hand corner. And so, because many of them had 3 or 4 bands and so forth. And so I wanted to get teaching experience. Particularly, I had great teachers in college who taught instrumental methods, and I had lots of good ideas that I developed on my own through my internship, and I just wanted to try out all those on the junior high kids, and I loved it. It was a great, great experience. Every year we improved substantially from the next year, one year to the next. We had my last couple of years at Southwest, we had a great 4 and 5 band. And in fact, a quick little funny story is my fourth year, I had gotten into Arkansas, Mosque and the composer from Arkansas. Sorry, folks, but this is one of these moments. But in any case, and it was a grade 5 piece of literature. It required really good trumpet playing, a lot of double and even some triple tonguing, I think, in it. And we picked that, and I worked him. I was a taskmaster, and I didn't hesitate to stop. I got the kids to buy into the notion it's all about the music, and I said, when we work up a piece like this for a rating, then we really need to take it apart. And I said, it's much like an Indianapolis race situation where they go a month ahead of time, they test the cars, they bring them off the track, they tear the engines apart, and they put them back together, put them back on the track, and they do this over and over again. I said, that's what we're doing. And I was able to convince them of that. We just had a real commitment on the part of the kids to go that direction. And it was all about, it wasn't about points, it wasn't about trophies, it wasn't about scores, it was about the music. And I was fortunate enough to do some things that a lot of other people couldn't do, and that's to constantly have really good stereo equipment and music to play for them as they were coming in and out of the room, and gave them sense of model and all of that.
So how long were you at the junior high?
I was at the junior high for 5 years, and I had become, the way I got involved with FBA was the first year, of course. The impact, what I learned in North Carolina was that it's all about people. And it's not about who you are, but it's about who can help you become a better whatever. In this case, who can help you be a better teacher. So I was never afraid to go out and ask people who I'd met, either through playing in an ensemble. We had Joe Kreines was doing the Brevard Symphony Orchestra at the time. We had a community band directed by an old Shanghai Symphony Marine. And so I played in those groups a couple of times a week. And in doing so, I made lots and lots of contacts. We were fortunate enough to have a band at Patrick Air Force Base still. It was a good source of private teachers. Through the symphony, I found other players who wanted to teach. And so I was able to get these kids connected and excited about really doing what they were capable of. And one of the few talents I had was being able to listen to a kid for a few minutes and figure out if they've got it, and just encouraging them to go as far as they could possibly go, regardless of what they were going to be in life. And it was very, very catching. And came up with a system of developing first chair players who were all-state quality, in many cases, many of whom made all-state, but all those, even those that didn't make all-state, were what I called all-state quality. They just didn't make the cut. And I turned them into section leaders. And pretty soon, over time, they became role models and teachers of their own sections in a lot of different ways, through solos and ensembles and so forth. And and I found very quickly, after about 2 years, that the key for them, for their growth, was not necessarily what I was doing on the podium, but what we were doing with solos and ensembles. Mm-hmm. And so every year, the numbers of students that participated increased exponentially.
Mm-hmm. This is at Melbourne?
Well, this was at Southwest
first.
And of course, Don Albert was doing the same thing at Melbourne. Of course, and I need to mention something about Don. He was a great mentor for me. He was an FSU grad. He was 4 years older. He had a couple of hard knocks his first few years, getting it all together as a band director, but he was smart as a whip. And he hooked up with Joe Kreines, among other people. Marion Scott was one of the band directors in Brevard, and over time I got invited into that group, and we kind of pushed each other. And in terms of director to director, it was Scotty and Don, and to me, and then there was Joe Kreines, of course, who had gotten fascinated with bands and was always, biting at our heels about raising the level of the literature and so forth. So we really owe a lot to Joe and what he's done. And of course, the rest is history, as everybody knows. But they were major influences for me.
So you were at junior for 5 years, and then Melbourne for 9?
For 9 years, yes.
Okay.
And I followed Don, And as I was telling you earlier, Don, his last 2 years were extraordinarily successful with that program. And he had just great players. They were playing great literature. I think the next to the last year they went to state and played the music for Prague. The last year they went to Apotheosis by Husa as well. The spring concert included a guest appearance by not only Husa as a guest conductor, but Fred Hemke playing the sax concerto, Husa sax concerto, and it was just it was one of those ideal situations. And again, it was about people getting along and listening. You know, as a young teacher, I was told and learned that that you need to. In fact, Don Albert gave me some great advice in the very beginning. He took me to my first district meeting in Orlando, and he said, "Andre," he said, "if you're smart," because we had had a lot of conversations about me. If you're smart, you will keep your mouth shut for the first year. Don't say a word. Just take it in and listen. And he said, now the second year, if you feel a little bit more confident, he said, maybe towards the end of the year, at one of the later meetings, that you raise your hand and ask a question. And he said, if you do that, they'll elect you to office the next year. And they did. And they did. They gave me the district secretary for 2 years. And Don was the chairman. Yeah, he knew. Yeah.
Now, you followed this amazing program at Melbourne. And after Melbourne, actually, you were asked to fill in for Dr. Shellhammer at Florida State.
Yes, I was.
So again, here you have to come into another situation.
Yeah. Well, now first I need to back up on that, because at the end, my 9th year at Melbourne, we had lots of honors. We'd been invited to play in a number of places, including MENC and other festivals around Florida, like Gainesville and USF, and finally my senior year, my graduating year from Melbourne High School, Bentley invited us to come up and share a halftime with the marching band, and along with Bobby Adams's Leon High School and the Chiefs. And we each did about a third of a program, and that was a great experience. By that time, Bobby and I had become good friends. And Bentley and I, of course, had been in Phi Beta Mu together. We were officers in the group, but at the end of that year, actually, at the time of going to the Festival for Winds, I think I mentioned this to you earlier. I had, in the beginning and through all the preceding years, it always was about the kids. You know, what can I do to make the kids better people and better players and all of that. And we talked a lot about integrity. We talked about teamwork. We talked about all the important things to making an ensemble gel. And we talked about literature, and we talked about the challenge of going just a little bit above where you think you are, and being willing to pay the price to do that. And but as I got into that last year, it became more about the program. I was feeling a lot of pressure to maintain the standards, you know, all of the stuff that happens in programs like that. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was losing touch with the kids. And I'd always prided myself in having good leadership, teaching them leadership, and having good officers and so forth. And so when we accepted the invitation to go up to Tallahassee for the Festival of Winds, it also coincided with the jazz festival that Bill Kennedy was doing. And so while I didn't take my jazz bands to perform there, I had them come on up with the symphonic band and along with the concert band. I wanted them to hear and take part in this wonderful festival opportunity, just to hear and listen. And I briefed him before we ever left. It was a 2-night trip, and just like State Festival. And I said, now, you know, we always have chaperones everywhere. And I said, you're either in one of two places: you're performing or you're sitting in an auditorium listening to groups and solos and ensembles. And I said, but it's going to be a little bit different here because there's going to be 2 performing venues. And so you need to, we're going to have to put you on your honor. Long story short, thanks to a band director at our motel who was, when we got back the first night, or the second night actually, observed a few of my students going over to a van and getting some liquor from an older student who happened to be an FSU student. And he came right down and grabbed me and said they went in that room. And so I went in there and, of course, discovered the worst. And over a period of about 2 weeks, it wasn't just 3 or 4 kids, it was 27 or 28 kids who'd either gone off campus to parties or during the day or had been drinking or whatever, breaking all the rules. And it totally devastated me because I'd realized it was like getting a cold bucket of water in your face, that I had kind of lost touch with what was going on with them. And I'd seen it happen to other directors, and I thought, oh, it'll never happen to me because I'm an ARC, you know, I mean, and it did. And so after a lot of soul searching, I resigned my position in the music committee for FBA and took a job with Henco in fundraising. And of course, that raised a lot of eyebrows because the first reaction is, oh, he's bailing out, or he's more interested in money than he is he's gone over to the dark side, you know, that sort of thing. And that wasn't it at all. I just needed to find out who Arrouet was. And so it gave me a year to figure out what my next step would be. And coincidentally, in February of that year, we were over in Plant City for a Phi Beta Mu weekend, and we were at a business meeting, and Bentley, he was the secretary and I was the president. He leaned over and said, Andre, said, what's going on with this thing? Are you happy with that? And I said, no, not really. And I said, I will be making a change next year. He said, really? He said, well, what would you think about taking over the marching chiefs for 2 years while I go off to Ohio State to get my doctorate? And I was stunned because I was not known as a marching band director. I was totally against the corps style stuff and all that. And I played for the football crowd and so forth. And so my wife and I prayed a lot about it, and we accepted the job, and thus began our 2-year Fantasy Island experience. And it was a great experience in many regards, and one was that I had followed a guy that was highly regarded, almost to a fault, and it was his group, and I knew that fully well. I had no intention of doing anything other than what he wanted me to do, and that's to hold the fort while he was gone. And but I ran into some rough edges in the very beginning because Chiefs had, you know, they had a lot of, they were dealt with in a much different way than you deal with a high school band. And so I had a lot of changing to do in terms of getting that under control. And it was really good for me. And of course, everything was just exponentially greater. I was a travel agent. Every time we took the Chiefs on the road, it was $25,000 for buses and motels. And so I was doing all of that stuff and trying to put shows together and so forth. And it was overwhelming. And I was, you know, we were working until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning every night, you know, trying to catch up and get stuff ready to go. And it was a very tough job. And I learned, the second year went much more smoothly. I had lots of help the first year as well from students. And then I had a couple of grad assistants. Don McLaurin was my grad assistant the first year, and John West and Scott Smith were my assistants the second year. So I had lots and lots of help along the way. In fact, Jim Bruce was another one that came to mind because Jim loved to write shows and write real. And when you're doing charts, 35 pages of charts for 350 people, it's very meticulous work. And so Jim taught me a lot about charting for such a large group, and wrote a number of shows for us in terms of the drill. And that was, the bottom line was that I realized after 2 years that I did not want to be a college marching band director. It wasn't in my DNA. Even though I had all that core experience and so forth, it was not in my DNA. And one of the things that I learned from Jim Croft in graduate school was in administration, there is the thing called music supervision. And while Jim didn't think much of music supervisors, he said that there is a need for them. And I had developed an interest in that when I was getting my master's. And so when the job opened back up in Brevard and my time was up at FSU, I was off, June Hinckley, who had the position, went to Tallahassee as the state music supervisor, and I had a job offer to take that position back in Brevard. And so there I went for the next 19 years. Wow. One of the things I was most proud of is that we never had a string program of any in any organized fashion. There were a few schools that were given string instruments when they were built, but we never really had a district-wide string program. And thanks to the Brevard Symphony and the Harris Corporation and June Hinckley, who wrote the first grant, we were able to start a string program and hired about 2 or 3 itinerant teachers to teach in the elementary school with the elementary teachers. And over a period of 18 or 19 years, we wound up with high school orchestras and orchestras in every high school, junior high, and elementary school. And we had, I think it was, the last count was about 18 traveling string consultants who worked with the local music teachers in developing those orchestras. And my last report was that they took 55 orchestras to district festival last year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, Andre, time is going quick on us.
Yeah,
we only have a few minutes left.
Sure.
So I was wondering if there were any words of wisdom you'd like to share with either younger directors that you could pass on?
Yeah.
Or
Yes. And first is, do not be afraid to ask for help. So many people think that they're expected to do it all themselves, and you really can't. If you're going to develop a program, you have to have help from lots of people. And you need to do whatever it takes to get those people excited about working with you and working with your kids. And if you're fortunate to be in an area where there's private instruction available, then you really work on the kids and the parents to help with that. But the main thing is to learn from the people who came before you, and to try to keep that tradition going. And part of this is the legacy of FBA, because FBA, I found out very, very quickly, had a very strong, even though it wasn't written down, strategic plan in terms of what you do to make a really complete music, instrumental music program at the junior high and senior middle school level. And I bought into it hook, line, and sinker. I served as a district chairman, I served on the music committee, and there wasn't anything bad that I got from FBA in regards to that. It's if you feel like you're weak in leadership, volunteer to take part, and over time you'll ask your first question, and soon you will become a leader in FBA, and it's happened time and time and time again. So that's one of the things. And finally, I'd like to say that the way you learn, and you've heard this many, many times, the way you learn is through making lots of mistakes. And of course, I made them all. Judgment mistakes from time to time, just mistakes, and mostly in judgment, picking literature sometimes. And but one of the things that I never backed away from was challenging the kids to do their utmost and to live up to the level that I thought they were capable of. And sometimes that meant a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to do that. But in the end, they loved you for it, and I still get emails today and Facebook postings from kids that I had 40, 50 years ago. I now have a retired band director in the form of Patty Lowe, who just retired from teaching last year, and she was the first trumpet player in my first band at Southwest as a 9th grader. Wow. That took her to Allstate, and it made me really come to realize how much of an impact we have on those who are in our charge, and we do make a difference. We do make a difference. And as far as the failure part goes, and this is a quick story, in 1975, I had just come off of a great year with the symphonic band and had a really good concert band that next year. And we went to the district festival, and I had made the mistake of programming the Shostakovich, first movement to the Shostakovich Fifth Symphony. And 2 weeks before district, I had hosted Jack Williams and a bunch of other judges for district solo and ensemble. And as we sat around the pool on Saturday night, the question came up, Andre, what are you playing for district festival? And I said, Jack, you inspired me. I'm going to do the Shostakovich Fifth First Movement. He said, Andre, don't do it. Change it right now. I said, but Jack, there's only 2 weeks to do. And he said, Andre, you have a great band. Just pull out a grade 5 War Horse Overture and you'll work it up and you'll be done. I said, Jack, I can't do that. We put too much time into it, yada, yada, yada. And sure enough, through a lot of other circumstances that had nothing to do with music, we crashed and burned the district. And it was because we had hired Jim Croft, who was at that time was a good friend of mine. I'd befriended him and likewise. And he told the truth. And we weren't ready to do the Shostakovich first movement. And for the first year we had tapes. Jim forgot to turn his tape off, and he turned to Bob Scott and said, Bob, I think we have a problem here. And as I was walking back in from the sight reading room under Harry Grant, Harry just extolling the virtues of this great sight reading band and all that, I just heard that Michael Clara had just taken over as district chairman, and I'm walking into the band room with my wife Patsy, and I said, honey, I said, I'm changing that tune for state. You know, that was less than a good performance, and I'm changing for state. Well, before I knew it, I'd gone in the office, and everybody had left the room. And I started pulling out the sheets, and there was Jim Croft and Scott saying, Andre, it didn't cut it. And what that did for me, for one thing, is it got Jim to offer me an opportunity to go to South Florida and get my master's degree, which is another story, but we don't really have time for it.
Well, I appreciate hearing your story and all the contributions that you did in Brevard and across our state. You obviously have a great passion towards music, and you've given us so much.
Yeah, I sure appreciate it. Yeah, it was a great ride.
Yeah, and it's still going.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Andre.
You bet. My pleasure.